Over every battlefront of the First World War, on land and at sea, Allied pilots owed more to one man than any other. His lifetime has spanned the age of aviation, and his name is woven into the very fabric of its history. Now aged 96, Sir Thomas Sopwith lives quietly at his manor house in Hampshire. A regular visitor, flying his own jet helicopter, is his son Tommy, an event taken completely for granted by both father and son.
Sir Thomas, good morning, sir.
How are you today?
How are you?
Thomas Octave, because he was the eighth child, Murdoch Sopwith, was born in 1888. His father was a well-to-do civil engineer, which enabled his only son to indulge a youthful passion for speed, motorbikes, fast boats, above all cars. But at the age of 18, his eyes turned skywards. The Short brothers were making balloons under the railway arches at Battersea, conveniently close to their source of lift, the gasworks.
I'd only just left school and started a very small motor business with an old friend of mine, and he was a great friend of Charlie Rolls, and he in turn was a very keen balloonatic, and we all got together and we did quite a lot of ballooning during the whole of 1906. I remember one very dirty trick we had. Phil Padden and I together took off very stupidly in a gale of wind. The wind was in the east, and we went off at the rate of knots across Battersea Park and almost straight down to the Bristol Channel. And we landed halfway between Bath and Bristol. I've forgotten the exact time now, but it was under 2 hours. We averaged just on 60 miles an hour.
But to young Sopwith, that record and the crash landing with which it ended was merely an appetizer, and powered flight now attracted him. In September 1910, he was sailing with his friend and mechanic, Fred Sigrist.
I was coming back across the channel from Dieppe. We were on our way to Dover, and we were practically becalmed in the middle of the channel. And I suddenly remembered that there was an American called Moisant who was trying to fly from Paris to London, and he just crossed the channel 2 or 3 days before and landed near Folkestone. And he had a little bit of trouble, so he stayed there for a day or two, and he gave some exhibition flying while he was there. So we popped the launch over the side in mid-channel and made off for Dover, for Folkestone, and sent the ship on to Dover. And we saw Moisant do a bit of flying, and that's really when I began to take a serious interest in it. From there, I went down to Brooklands, where Mr. Maurice Hewlett had brought a farmer over from France and was giving joyrides round Brooklands at $5 a time. So I thought I'd go for have a $5's worth, which consisted of 2 circuits inside the track at Brooklands. And I think that was the start of the bug. I thought, well, this feels all right. I better have a crack at it. There were 2 brothers in the motor business, at least one was in the motor business, called Warwick Wright. And his brother, Howard Wright, started to build aeroplanes. And he had built a couple of monoplanes for other people, and he got a third one very nearly complete with a 40 horsepower ENV engine. And I took this over, and I took it down to Brooklands and started to teach myself to fly on it. Well, that consisted of rolling along the ground and making it go more or less where you wanted to go. And that took a certain amount of time, but eventually one made friends with it. Then you started to roll it along in a straight line and go a little bit faster each time. And as happened in several cases, one's first flight was by mistake, because you looked over the side and found the ground had gone. So you had to try and get back again. Then I, almost at once, bought from Howard Wright a biplane he was building with another ENV engine, but 60 instead of 40 horsepower. And I made friends with that fairly early. And one day, Harold Perrion, who was the secretary of the Aero Club, came down to observe a fellow called Creswell do his flights for his certificate. So when he duly done his flights in the morning, Harold Perrion came to me and said, "Why don't you go for your ticket?" I said, "Well, I haven't done a turn yet." I said, "Wait a minute, I'll go and try." I said, "If it comes off, I'll give it a run." Which duly happened. And after lunch, I passed the flying test for my ticket.
Within 2 months of first watching Moisant, Tom Sopwith had taught himself to fly and became the 31st British pilot to gain his license. Immediately, he started to compete. In November 1910, the British Empire Michelin Cup for the longest flight of the year, and for a time he held the record at 107 3/4 miles. 1 month later, the Baron de Forest Prize for the longest flight into Europe, to be completed that year by a British pilot and aircraft. Dover was the favourite start, but on Sigrist's advice, Sopwith chose Eastchurch on the Isle of Sheppey so as to be overland in case of early engine failure. On Sunday, December the 18th, he was ready for takeoff.
I was dressed up rather in a fancy dress to keep warm. I'd got 2 pairs of everything on, like underclothes. I'd got a very thick suit of blue serge, and then 2 woolies and a scarf which went right around the top of my head. On my feet, I had bedroom slippers, inside things we call gouties, snow boots. And they worked very well. I never suffered from cold at all. I crossed Dover at 1,500 feet, and I'd lost about a couple of 100 feet by about mid-channel. And I thought, now, shall I leave this alone or give the throttle 1 more notch? So I risked it and gave the throttle 1 more notch. And I crossed the French coast. I've never yet discovered exactly where. Must have been somewhere between Calais and Boulogne. I had a compass, but it didn't operate satisfactorily. And I really was flying, took my direction, first of all from Sheppey to Dover, which was comparatively easy. And after that, the sun went in, and one was left with nothing to steer by except the smoke from factory chimneys, which I used as a rough guide. And I didn't really know where I was. I got into hilly country, and the wind got very rough, and I had no seat belt. I was just sitting on the leading edge of the bottom plane, and one bump threw me out of my seat. Well, I thought it was time to stop. So I landed with half a tank of petrol left.
Gosh.
And I still didn't know exactly where I was. Well, I landed in a field and pulled up. I was about 50 or 60 yards short of an old man who'd got his back to me, and he was hoeing potatoes. And he slowly stood up and turned around and looked at me. And he turned around again and went hoeing his bloody potatoes. So that was that.
That potato field was near Beaumont in Belgium. Distance 177 miles, time 3 hours 40 minutes. Sopwith's telegram home made no mention of this. His sole concern was to get back to beat off any subsequent challenger before the competition ended on December the 31st. None came, and with the £4,000 prize money in his pocket, enough to buy 4 aeroplanes, he set off with his sister for the birthplace of powered flight, the United States. Society and the American press welcomed him as the typical English sporting gentleman and the world's tallest aviator. But not everyone was pleased. Wilbur and Orville Wright claimed the patent for powered flight in the United States. Sopwith typically diffused the argument by buying one of their Burgess Wright biplanes, which he saw as ideal for the popular quick-start competitions of pioneer barnstorming. From the gun, engine start, pilot aboard and airborne, Sopwith's time was 9 seconds, a record which stands to this day. Highly dangerous, but it won him a lot of money, though he was critical of the Wright brothers' control system.
You must remember that at this point of time, there were no standardized controls like there are today. And each manufacturer fitted a different system.
Let me give you your stick, Sir Tom, and then you can show us how the control system worked on the Wright aeroplane.
Well, take the Wright. Your pilot was sitting like this, with his feet out in front, and his feet did nothing. He had a lever here on the left, which moved forward and aft, like that. And that controlled the elevator only.
Yes.
On the other side, he had another lever, which also moved forward and aft, but that was to control the lateral movement of your wings. And you had to think in terms of your right wingtip. And you pulled it up by pulling your lever backwards, and you pushed it down by pushing the lever forward.
Yes.
It's quite unnatural.
Yes.
And at the same time, to make things more awkward still, was an articulated handle, which moved like that, which controlled the rudder. Well, I had a bit of dual control flying with one of their pilots when I got my first Wright machine, and I got to the stage where on a very calm morning I could either fly straight ahead with one wing down or wings level and crabwise. So I thought, this is no good at all. The only way is to fit my own type of controls on their machine, which we did in the shed.
Those were very experimental days. Did you have any accidents?
I was flying with one of the directors of Doubledays, the publishers, as a passenger in the Blair Air. And I think it was entirely my own fault. We got up to about 120, 150 feet and lost control and literally spun into the ground. And we both got out of it and walked away. Fred Segrist, my mechanic then, came up to me afterwards. He said, you know, he said, that passenger of yours, he said, his hair was standing straight up on end. And he said he'd had 4 flights and 3 crashes.
It really was rather dangerous, though, wasn't it? I mean, quite a lot of your young friends were killed.
They were, but on the other hand, you must remember that our flying was done at very low speeds.
Yeah.
So when we did crash, it wasn't like a modern crash where you hit the ground very hard indeed.
No, you would
And
be...
you were quite, you could do quite a lot of crashing without hurting anybody.
Brooklands, February 1912. Sopwith invested the handsome profits of his American tour in a flying school here, where he'd taught himself to fly.
I remember one day I was sitting in my office there, and a fellow came and knocked on the door, and I said, "Come in." He said, "Sykes told me to come and have a talk to you because I've got a problem. I want to join the flying corps. But in order to do that, I've got to get my Aero Club certificate within the next 10 days, because after that I'll be too old." He turned up at 6 o'clock the next morning and helped push the machine out, and he worked jolly hard, and we got him his ticket within 10 days.
And what was his name again, Sir Tom?
Trenchard. Before he died, he was known generally as the father of the Royal Air Force. He was a very extraordinary character. Thank God he didn't go on flying, because I don't think he'd ever have been a good pilot.
Another pupil was a young Australian, Harry Hawker, who'd got a job with Sopwith specifically to learn to fly and was charged £50 for it. Soon he was chief pilot. And with Fred Sigrist as mechanic and engineer and Sopwith as organizer and innovator, they set up shop to build, repair and modify aircraft as well as teach flying. The Sopwith Aviation Company was born.
The first two aircraft we built were really assembled from bits in the shed at Brooklands. We had got a works, and the first one, I more or less copied the wing layout of the Wright, but turned it into a tractor.
Yes.
By fitting a fuselage, which we more or less copied from Blériot and Oriel, and I took the 70 horsepower gnome engine out of my Blériot and put it on the front. And that really made a very successful aeroplane. And it was very lightly loaded, had a very, very low takeoff and landing speed. I should think very little more than 30 miles an hour. And we didn't go very fast anyhow, probably about 40, 45.
Yes. And the other aeroplane?
The other airplane was a grown-up copy of the first one, except that it had a little more power, and it was a three-seater, 2 passengers in front and a pilot immediately behind them.
But that aeroplane, from its pictures, really brings us into a new generation of aircraft. It doesn't look like a kite anymore. It looks like a real aeroplane.
Oh, I think it was.
Yes.
And that's the first machine I sold to the Admiralty. When the Admiralty had it, they took it down to their school at Eastchurch on the Isle of Sheppey. And it really did quite a lot of useful work there, including a daily flight over to Whitstable to collect oysters for the mess, because it could land on the beach.
Now, at this time, you also became interested in seaplanes and flying boats.
Well, having built 2 machines in the shed at Brooklands, it appeared that we ought to try and get a little more space for a factory. And I went off and I hired an old, disused skating rink in Kingston, which was a handy place. It was halfway between Brooklands and London, about 10 miles from each, and about the right size. And the first machine we turned out, I think the very first one, was a flying boat, which was called the Bat Boat. The boat itself was built by my old friend Sam Saunders at Cowes, and we built the rest in Kingston. And with that machine, we won the Mortimer Singer Prize. I think it was £500 for the first British aircraft to be amphibious.
In 1913, Sopwith won the International Motorboat Trophy on the Saunders-built Maple Leaf 4. Then, in August, he put floats on the famous three-seater for Harry Hawker to fly in the Daily Mail Circuit of Britain, and they won another £1,000 prize. But the major air event of the time was the Schneider Trophy, a race for seaplanes and of enormous international prestige. Sopwith fitted floats to one of his tabloid biplanes. Howard Pixton was the pilot, and their victory at Monte Carlo in April 1914 humbled the French, Americans and Italians and put British aircraft firmly in competition before the world. Germany, however, had other ambitions. When war came, the Sopwith Aviation Company was well placed to meet the unexpected emergency. They had designed and built a range of successful aeroplanes, and both the Royal Navy and Royal Flying Corps were already customers. But quickly the demand for aircraft became insatiable. The ex-skating rink at Kingston soon proved too small. They moved down the road to Canbury Park and later to an even bigger factory in Ham.
I don't think we really looked on the importance of what aircraft we're going to do in the future. I don't think anybody had the slightest idea as to how far they were going to be developed in a comparatively short time. In World War I, we started by building aircraft without drawings, just the sketches. And then, of course, they gradually got more complicated and took longer to design.
Where did you get the craftsmen to build the aeroplanes? Because
Locally?
But it was a completely new technology, wasn't it?
No, not awfully. All the people we employed were craftsmen in their own trades. They were either joiners or fitters. It was really a question of making something which could be made by somebody without any special skills.
Within months, Sopwith created an astonishing organization for aircraft design, construction and development, maintaining personal contact with pilots and pooling information with the government aircraft factory at Farnborough. Classic designs such as the Pup and the Camel were built in huge numbers.
The Pup was pre-Camel.
Yeah.
It was a dear little machine with an 80 horsepower dome. And as a flying machine, it was a sort of machine you could give to anybody and he couldn't hurt himself. It did everything you wanted it to do.
Yes.
It had no tricks and no vices. Now, the Camel, on the other hand, in the hands of a competent pilot who had made friends with the Camel, could really play wonderful tricks. We were very careful to keep our weights close together, particularly in the fighters, because by doing that, your finished aircraft was very much more maneuverable. But it was a vicious little machine to fly and not easy, and it wasn't everybody's cup of tea.
It was a fighter pilot's aeroplane, wasn't it?
Yes, not only a fighter pilot, but you had to be a good pilot to fly a Camel.
Yes. Your aeroplanes have marvelous names, which everybody knows today. How did you decide on those names?
Purely by chance. To start with, we never called the aeroplane anything except a works number. Just as you build a ship in a shipyard, that ship is known by its number until it gets a name after it's launched.
Yes, yes.
Or when it's launched. Now, the first ones like the Tabloid and the Pup weren't named by us at all. They were named by the squadrons who were using them. They were nicknames.
Salamander Snipe Snapper, Dolphin Cuckoo Hippo, Bulldog, Pup and Camel. All members of the Sopwith Zoo, as it was also nicknamed, not to mention others, including the triplane and the 1.5 strutter, which was built by the 1,000 under license in France and elsewhere. The Sopwith Camel was the top-scoring Allied fighter with 2,700 victories, including shooting down von Richthofen and the destruction of the Zeppelin sheds at Tonda. By 1918, Sopwith aircraft were turning the tide of the air war on every front. Tens of thousands of people were employed, including subcontractors, and at the Ham factory alone they were producing 90 fighters a week. But within days of the armistice, the government saw no further need for a British aircraft industry.
You suddenly have a colossal business, which is cut off literally overnight. You wake up one morning and nobody wants an aircraft. We liquidated the Sopwith company and started afresh with a little tiny corner of it, which we hired back from the liquidator, and started with a team about the same size as the team we started with at Brooklyn in 1912. And then we gradually built that up again.
And what did you call that company?
We called it the Hawker Company.
And the Hawker Company was soon producing aircraft worthy of their illustrious forebears. Hart, Hind and Fury led to the Hurricane in the nick of time for the Battle of Britain. And since World War II, the Hunter and arguably the masterpiece of them all, the Kestrel jump jet prototype, now the Harrier. But Sir Thomas Sopwith, industrialist, never lost his taste for racing, and in 1934 came closer than any Briton to regaining the America's Cup. Throughout his life, from the pioneer days of flying to the age of jet and aerospace, Sir Thomas Sopwith has epitomized the name he gave to his racing yachts, Endeavour.
Sir Thomas, of all your aeroplanes, Sopwiths and Hawkers and the Hawker Siddeley group, of which are you most proud?
I find that a very difficult question to answer. It's rather like asking the father of a large family to pick out his favorite daughter. I think the Harrier is the greatest jump, the greatest stride in the development of all our aircraft. And I remember very well watching the Harrier, or its prototype,
Yes.
when it first flew. And I saw an airplane take off, climb, fly very fast, slow down, stop, and fly backwards and sideways, all under control. I reckoned I'd seen everything.
At 96, a lifetime of amazing achievement behind you, Sir Thomas, to what do you most attribute your success?
Pure luck. Interested in. From there, I went down to Brooklands, where Mrs. Maurice Hewlett had brought a farmer over from France and was giving joyrides around Brooklands at a $5 a time. So I thought I'd go for have a $5's worth, which consisted of 2 circuits inside the track at Brooklands. And I think that was the start of the bug. I thought, well, this feels all right. I better have a crack at it. There were 2 brothers in the motor business, at least one was in the motor business, called Warwick Wright. And his brother, Howard Wright, started to build aeroplanes. And he had built a couple of monoplanes for other people, and he got a third one very nearly from Dieppe. We were on our way to Dover, and we were practically becalmed in the middle of the channel. And I suddenly remembered that there was an American called Moisant who was trying to fly from Paris to London, and he just crossed the channel 2 or 3 days before and landed near Folkestone. And he had a little bit of trouble, so he stayed there for a day or 2, and he gave some exhibition flying while he was there. So we popped the launch over the side in mid-channel and made off for Dover, for Folkestone, and sent the ship on to Dover. And we saw Moisant do a bit of flying, and that's really when I began to take a serious interest. We did quite a lot of ballooning during the whole of 1906. I remember one very dirty trick we had. Phil Padden and I together took off very stupidly in a gale of wind. The wind was in the east, and we went off at the rate of knots across Battersea Park and almost straight down to the Bristol Channel. And we landed halfway between Bath and Bristol. I've forgotten the exact time now, but it was under 2 hours. We averaged just on 60 miles an hour.
But to young Sopwith, that record and the crash landing with which it ended was merely an appetizer, and powered flight now attracted him. In September 1910, he was sailing with his friend and mechanic, Fred Sigrist.
I was coming back across the channel.
Over every battlefront of the First World War, on land and at sea, Allied pilots owed more to one man than any other. His lifetime has spanned the age of aviation, and his name is woven into the very fabric of its history. Now aged 96, Sir Thomas Sopwith lives quietly at his manor house in Hampshire. A regular visitor, flying his own jet helicopter, is his son Tommy, an event taken completely for granted by both father and son.
Sir Thomas, good morning, sir.
How are you today? How are you?
Thomas Octave, because he was the 8th child Murdoch Sopwith, was born in 1888. His father was a well-to-do civil engineer, which enabled his only son to indulge a youthful passion for speed, motorbikes, fast boats, above all cars. But at the age of 18, his eyes turned skywards. The Short brothers were making balloons under the railway arches at Battersea, conveniently close to their source of lift, the gasworks.
I'd only just left school and started a very small motor business with an old friend of mine, and he was a great friend of Charlie Rolls, and he in turn was a very keen balloonatic, and we all got together and